Running a business in Philadelphia takes a lot. It takes strong relationships, unique insight, and inspired leadership. It takes staying in the know and making the most of every opportunity. Everything it takes is everything you'll find at CCPA. A resource for business support, a chance to hear from experts in their field and get up close and personal with city leaders. An insider's guide to what's happening and what's next in Philadelphia. With CCPA, business is personal.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our kickoff event for our new series, Sustainable Philadelphia. We are really excited about entering into this space of sustainability and environmental stewardship, and to learn how this intersects with our business community and provide opportunities for all of us to help make a difference. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Suzette Munley of Munley Associates and the president of CCPA. We are an intimate and diverse group of business owners, executives, and managers looking to build relationships and offer each other meaningful resources. We take pride in bringing you unparalleled access to speakers, decision makers, and leaders who are shaping Center City. We keep our members and guests informed about business challenges and opportunities in Philadelphia. So let's take a minute and touch on the benefits of becoming a member, a sponsor, or collaborating with CCPA. We think it's easiest to remember as being Center City Smart. We have signature events where you get the inside scoop on development, sustainability, exceptional women leaders, and the city's movers and shakers. There are marketing opportunities that are available only to members and sponsors, and that enables you to reach thousands of businesses and consumers. You have access to our speakers and panelists in a way that few organizations can deliver. The up-close, intimate, and personal experience of a CCPA event is like no other. You can reimagine your employee benefits available to members through Penworth Financial Services, and you can take the lead with opportunities to build your network, grow your business, and be a CCPA ambassador. So if you'd like to join today, there's a link posted in the chat. Mark your calendars for our upcoming events. They are posted now on your screen, so please take note of those. And a special call out to our next Sustainable Philadelphia event, Protecting Our Rivers, Delaware, and Schuylkill on June 24th, featuring William Penn Foundation and Philadelphia Water Department. For today's event, we encourage you to use the chat to ask questions, comment, make suggestions, and connect with each other. And you can also find a link to today's program there. I'd like to acknowledge our sustaining sponsor and our preferred benefits provider, Michael Craig of Penworth Financial Services. We are pleased to collaborate with and welcome members of the Energy Co-op. And now I'd like to welcome CCPA Vice President and the creator of this series, David Lane, to say a few words and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Suzette. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our launch event for this brand new series of ours. And we consider it a very high priority to get this moving and build this series as time goes on. So you might ask, well, why is CCPA interested in, and we're a business group, why are we interested in launching a series like that? Well, it's pretty simple, because a healthy city, fresh air, clean water, parks, open spaces, a good environment is a great place to live, raise a family, work. And when all that happens, those are the building blocks of a great economy. And that is how business wins, when all that works together. So that's why. That is why we are very interested in bringing an awareness and understanding about the sustainability efforts of our city and our region in this new series. And we have a great leadoff hitter, Christine Knapp, who is the director of the Office of Sustainability for the City of Philadelphia under Mayor Kenny. Christine's been at it quite a while. She worked under Michael Nutter. I think that's where that sustainability office actually began those years ago. And before that, I met Christine. We worked for Penn Future, one of Pennsylvania's major environmental advocacy organizations. So we have a real pro as our leadoff hitter this morning. And I thank Christine so much and welcome her and introduce Christine Knapp to our group. Take it away, Christine.
Thank you, David. Appreciate the introduction. I am going to share my screen and give you a presentation. I'm happy to have folks pop questions into the chat or unmute and ask them as I go, or we can hold them to the end, whatever feels right for you. So Greenworks is Philadelphia's sustainability plan. As David said, it did start during Mayor Nutter's tenure, and then we updated it in 2016 when I came into office with Mayor Kenny. So it's been about 12 years since we've had an Office of Sustainability in Philadelphia. I like to start off here because the word sustainability can mean different things to different people, or mean nothing to some people. And so we like to define it up front. And so we look at it through these four lenses: that a sustainable Philadelphia is one in which we're looking at equity, health, environmental, and economic value through sustainable actions. The Greenworks plan is organized around these 8 key vision areas. So food and drinking water, air, energy, climate change, natural resources, transportation, waste. And then the final one is sort of the opportunity bucket: education, stewardship, and economic opportunity through sustainability. I normally give a presentation that dives into Greenworks. But today I'm actually going to give you a new presentation focused more on the city's climate action playbook. And in part, that's because climate is the crisis that we really are facing, and the sustainability playbook, or the sustainability plan, very much is in support of our climate work. But we put out this new climate action playbook to give a sense of how these two issues, sustainability and climate, are interrelated, and how the work is sort of aligned towards meeting our goals of creating a more sustainable city, and a city that is managing the climate crisis as best we can. So it's organized really around these 3 areas. One is how we as a city reduce our contribution to the causes of climate change, and then also how we adapt and become more resilient to the changing climate that we're experiencing, and then how nature is actually sort of a tool for doing both of those things. And I'll explain a little bit more about all of this as I go through. Earlier this year in January, Mayor Kenny updated the city's climate action goal. It had been a goal to reduce carbon emissions in the city by 80% by 2050, but now has been updated to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And that change is in part because that's what science is indicating is necessary to really stave off the worst impacts of climate change. And it is also the goal of the Biden administration, so that we are in better alignment for any federal grant programs or technical assistance programs that may be coming forward. So we just made that update, and then we're able to use this playbook as a way to show how we meet it. This is a maybe overly complicated chart just to simply say business as usual doesn't get us anywhere. Doing everything that we currently have in our climate action playbook gets us pretty far. We still actually have a lot more to go. And so this is a heavy lift, and there's going to be a lot of work that everybody needs to do to help to get to that goal. In terms of where our carbon footprint comes from in Philadelphia, this is often surprising to folks, but buildings and industry account for 72% of our carbon footprint. When I give any public speaking remarks like this, almost all the questions I get are about waste and recycling. And that's because that's where people's brains go to, I think, first, because we're the ones who are making and touching waste all day long, right? The coffee cup, the tissue, it's so tactical. And if pushed, people will think about cars as a source of transportation because of the tailpipe, but people very rarely think about buildings as a major source of carbon pollution. But they are, using energy all day long. And unfortunately, we're an older city, so a lot of our building stock is older as well. but also the energy that powers our buildings is still primarily coming from a lot of dirtier sources in Pennsylvania. So that's why buildings are outsized. We are also fortunate to have a good public transportation system and walkable and bikeable communities, particularly in Center City. So that's why transportation is a little lower, where nationally transportation is the #1 source, but in Philadelphia it switches. And then waste is low because it only really counts for landfill waste. But when we think about the life cycle of consumption, essentially from the manufacturing of the product to the transportation of it, to using it, to transporting it back to a landfill, there's actually a lot more emissions that are associated with waste than just what shows up here. So I'd like to point that out. So I'm going to just give you some sense of what some of our, what we call climate mitigation strategies, again, how we reduce the city's carbon footprint that sort of fall into these buckets around buildings, which is sort of divided into two. One is making buildings more efficient, and one is having the power that we use in our buildings come from cleaner sources, and then transportation and waste strategies. So I'll give you a brief sense of what some of those are for the city. You probably will be familiar with some of them. First, we like to lead by example in city government. So we have our own municipal energy master plan for our buildings with these 4 goals that you can see here. And actually really pleased to say that that first goal of reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, we just did a calculation a couple of weeks ago, and we are at 39% reduction already. So I think we'll blow that goal out of the water by 2030. You know, again, we really have 2 options here. We can use less energy in our buildings, and we can use cleaner energy in our buildings. We have a variety of different tactics for using less energy, you know, doing retrofits, improving operational practices. We're about to undergo an LED street lighting conversion project. So all of the street lights in the entire city will get changed over to LEDs. It's the single largest energy saving project in the city, and we think has a host of additional benefits in terms of public safety and visibility. So we're excited to bring that project forward. You might be wondering why I have a picture of the art museum. And that's because the city actually owns and pays for the utilities in the art museum, which is old and big and 24/7 because the art is always there. So humidity and temperature controls for the art means we can never set it back the way like an office building, you know, at nighttime when no one's there, you can kind of set things back, but the art is there. So it's a 24/7 sort of operation. So we actually just invested $11 million into energy efficiency in that building that just wrapped up, and we'll save 20% off the energy bill. And we'll pay back the $11 million with that 20% savings until it's paid off. We're also, again, moving towards using cleaner energy. Some folks may have heard an announcement about 1.5 years ago that the city signed an agreement for what's called a solar power purchase agreement, which basically allows us to contract with a third party who builds us a solar facility, and then the city buys the electricity from it. And that's it. We don't have to do any operations or maintenance. We're just buying the electricity, and we're doing it at the same rate as what we would have paid for electricity otherwise. But we're also locking in today's rate for 20 years. So we'll likely save money as energy costs go up. So this is great for us from meeting our clean energy goals, from our sort of cost control measures and stability over time. And it helps to create jobs in Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia workers will be building this project. And then, so that's the city's work. Stretching out from there, we know, again, the buildings are such a big part of Philadelphia's carbon footprint, and there's a lot we have to do to hit. This was actually for an 80 by 50 goal, so that blue box at the end actually now has to go all the way down to 0. So there's still a lot. I show this to just give you a sense of how important it is that we have cleaner electricity that power our buildings. It's such a big part of the strategy. So there's a variety of different programs. Some of you who own your own buildings, if they're over 50,000 square feet, you may be familiar with the benchmarking program in which buildings over 50,000 square feet have to annually disclose energy and water consumption to the city, and we make that information publicly available, and we give sort of scorecards to buildings to let them know how they rank compared to a peer building. We've actually seen a reduction of 5% of energy use and a 12% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in those buildings that have been participating. And mind you, we didn't ask them to do anything different. We just asked for information. but information is power, right? And information is helpful for someone to know how they stack up to another building. And so just seeing that improvement over time tells us we're going down the right path in supporting buildings, particularly large buildings, and moving in that direction. A lot of different work around solar, I won't go too much into. I'll point out for this group, the 2030 district is managed by the Green Building United, and it's made up of properties in what they define the 2030 district to be, which is mostly Center City and University City, with a little bit of stretching into a sort of North Philly along like the Temple campus, and I think maybe a little outpost in the Navy Yard, but it's primarily sort of Center City and University City. And it's a totally voluntary program to support buildings in reducing energy use and meeting sort of additional goals around reduction of water use, increase of clean transportation, et cetera. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to provide more information about that. Another tool that was part of this action plan was to launch a commercial property assessed clean energy program. It's called PACE or CPACE. Folks may also be interested in knowing about this as a financing tool. It's very attractive because it allows a building to finance energy efficiency or renewable energy projects in their buildings over a much longer period of time by having it paid back through your property assessment rather than through a private financing company. And so CPACE has been about a year now, and it's been very successful and managed by our partners at the Energy Authority. We're working on with PGW to understand sort of what the options are for them in the future as we move towards a lower no carbon future. We own a gas utility, so we're in a unique and strange position, but we can work collaboratively to find ways that they can continue to provide heat and comfort services to residents and businesses in a way that does not contribute to our carbon problem. And then the last one, I think I have a little extra slide here. This is forthcoming, and again, I think this group might be particularly interested in knowing, especially again, if you're owning or operating large buildings in the city. This is going to be a new requirement for large buildings, for non-residential buildings over 50,000 square feet, that will have to either achieve a high performance building standard or will have to perform a tune-up on their building every 5 years. And tune-up, as it sounds, very similar to kind of every few years you have to get your car checked out, make sure it's not doesn't have a fuel leak or something, that it's operating safely. This is a similar analogy for buildings. It's a quick assessment to make sure your building is operating as efficiently as it can. It's not requiring major capital investments or structural changes. It's a lot of times literally tightening screws or changing the settings of your control systems. We did a pilot for a city building, the Juvenile Justice Center, and we invested $12,000 in the audit and the corrections, and we saved $24,000 in the first year. So a very good return on investment from this program that we think, while people may not love being required to do it, we think that there'll be a lot of benefit that will come to those who go through it. So that's all the building stuff. I am not our transportation expert in the city by any stretch, but the city does have a transportation office that's been moving forward with a lot of really important programs and projects. Just to give you a sense of the city's priorities, you can see by this chart down here, obviously walking, biking are zero transportation, but when we prioritize, public transit, you can see that's just even the dirtiest part of public transit, a diesel powered bus perhaps is still emitting less carbon than a single vehicle or single occupancy vehicle does. So we really are having a large focus right now on getting people back on public transit. You may have seen the Philadelphia Transit Plan was released about maybe a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, with this focus on increasing ridership. Public transit in the city had already been taking a hit pre-pandemic due to like Uber and Lyft. But of course, this pandemic has made it worse. And so trying to make strategic investments in the transportation system to make it cleaner, safer, more accessible, to make it sort of the option of choice for folks and not last resort. So this is important work, both from an economic perspective, from an equitable perspective, but also from our climate goals. One example here is Indigo, which I'm sure most folks have seen, stations and bikes all over the city at this point. Another expansion of this program is slated for the coming year. And during the pandemic, ridership and usership of the bike share program skyrocketed as folks didn't feel maybe comfortable taking Ubers or Lyfts or public transit. And so we want to keep that ridership up. And I think Philadelphia has done a good job compared to other cities in really using bike share as a transportation system and not just as a amenity for tourists, although it does that, serves that role as well. It's really more about serving our own residents first and helping them to get around. Moving into waste, the zero waste and litter cabinet was sort of put on hold last year, but some of the staff were moved into my office. And so we've been absorbing some waste reduction activities, particularly the one that I think folks are probably going to be familiar with is the plastic bag ban, which is forthcoming this summer. It'll begin, and then by the fall, there'll be enforcement on that. And so that our office is sort of managing some of that rollout and education and making sure people really know what it's about and how to comply with it. We're also focusing on circular economy, and this is the sort of concept of, as I said, with consumption, rather than having this linear path of, buy a product, use a product, throw it in the landfill, creating more circles for how products get used so that we can keep things out of the landfill in the first place. I think we've sort of realized that we can't really recycle our way out of our waste problem. We really just actually need to reduce the amount of waste that we produce. Also focusing a lot on food waste. And if any of you are involved with restaurants or managing or owning or operating restaurants, we'll be launching a food waste program this spring and summer to work with restaurants and grocery stores on how to reduce the amount of food waste produced and to find better outlets for the food waste that is created. Oh, I just did that highlight. So yeah, this is the forthcoming sort of food service business challenge that will be coming to about 10 or 15 businesses later this year. As I said in the beginning, nature is such an important strategy for the city in both being what we call like a carbon sink and helping to attract carbon and keep it in the ground and keeping it from being emitted, but also in helping us to adapt to the changing climate. And so parks, trees, urban agriculture, and green stormwater infrastructure, which you'll hear a lot more about, it sounds like in your next session with the Water Department and the William Penn Foundation. You'll hear a lot more about green stormwater infrastructure. Tree Phillies, sort of a highlight of that program. You may be familiar with this. It's given away more than 22,000 free trees to residents over the years. And there is actually a urban forest master plan process that's being undergone right now. And there's actually a public survey I could probably find and drop the link to in a minute if you want to give some suggestions on how to improve tree canopy in the city and give folks more readily access to getting trees in their community. I also like to point out that we see food also as a solution to climate change, both again on the mitigation and adaptation. And my office manages the Food Policy Advisory Council, which is made up of folks throughout the entire food system, restaurant owners and operators, urban farmers and gardeners, you name it, sort of all parts of the food system are here, and in order to advise the city on policies that can help support the goals of these variety of different groups within the food system space. Now I'm going to move to the second half, which is about adapting to the changing climate. This quote came from Mayor Kenny's second inaugural address a year and a half ago, where he committed to hiring a chief resilience officer and really making climate resiliency and adaptation a key part of his second term. We have hired a chief resilience officer this past fall, and unfortunately the pandemic and budget cuts kept us from launching an entire citywide adaptation plan, but we are still moving forward with key parts of our resiliency work. For those of you who don't know, a quick summary of what climate change means for Philadelphia is it'll be hotter and wetter. So hot, pretty self-explanatory. Wetter means a combination of sea level rise and then more and more severe storms. And so you can see this picture on the right was from August in Eastwick in Southwest Philadelphia, where over 600 properties were flooded out. These are the maps of the whole city in terms of flood risk. So the left-hand side would be 2 or 4 or 6 feet of sea level rise, depending on how much carbon we continue to emit. And the right-hand side is those same levels with a storm on top of it. So you can see the river wards, certainly very much impacted, and then going down to South and Southwest Philadelphia. And what's important to note in those areas is the airport, the Navy Yard, the former refinery that Hilco is now redeveloping, and then Eastwick and Southwest Philly. So, major economic assets of the city that are very much at risk from sea level rise, that we need to have more concerted plans and coordinated plans to protect these areas. The other risk on heat, this is an average surface temperature mapping map of the city to see how heat shows up in Philadelphia. The areas that are red can be as much as 22 degrees hotter than the areas that are blue in the city. Those are the cooler areas. So we already have a pretty big heat disparity. And then, the projections are that this can worsen over time as the city gets hotter. So we've been working in Hunting Park in North Philadelphia, which is one of those heat vulnerable communities, to kind of understand what residents are experiencing when it's hot, what kind of tools or programs or resources they would need to help stay cooler, and how we can help get the neighborhood to be cooler in the long run, which involves a lot of these different community identified strategies around adding more greening and trees, helping people stay cool at home through better access to air conditioning and home energy repairs and assistance programs, and being able to stay cool outside as well. A lot of our schools and rec centers don't have air conditioning, so there's some problems there. And now we're trying to work on implementing the strategies here in that community and expanding into others as well. And so all of this is, as I said, our strategy got thrown off by the pandemic, but this is the sort of general way that we're going to be facilitating urban resilience in the city through an internal city cabinet, an environmental justice commission that will be launching later this spring, a research panel tapping into the amazing academic partners, that are in Philadelphia, and then a civic steering committee. And if folks are interested in learning about any of those, well, not the internal city one, but any of those other 3 external groups and serving on those, please let me know, and I can let you know how to indicate your interest in serving on one of them. And then I think I'm going to end here, which is that folks often ask, what can we do? How can we be a part of helping to achieve the city's goals? These are actually a little outdated screenshots, but we just updated these Greenworks on the ground guides. They're organized around the 8 key vision areas of Greenworks. And we actually have 3 versions of them. We have one for individuals, one for communities, and one for institutions like businesses, so that there are different programs that are available, depending if you're just a regular resident versus whether you're a business. One I want to point out specifically to this group is that we're one of the only cities in the country that has a sustainable business tax credit. And so that's something that your business can take advantage of if you have a sustainable sort of operation. You don't have to be a climate consultant group or working directly in environmental work, as long as you are sort of serving it using your business in a way to achieve these goals. So we have, I think, like a salon that gets it because they manage their waste really well, and they use low toxic products, and they've demonstrated that they're operating their business sustainably. So definitely something to take a look at and share with others as well. And I think this link works, but if not, I will drop the link, and I can share this entire presentation with folks if folks are interested in looking at it again. So that is my quick overview. That's my contact information if anyone wants to reach out to me. I did see questions coming in, but I couldn't keep up with it all. So happy to kind of go back and go through questions, or people can unmute and just ask me directly.
Okay, that's great. I'll start by reading what had come into the chat, and then we can go from there. So the first question was, is there a consortium of cities or states working together to align their green goals? And how does federal commerce, transportation, and interior departments link to the green goals at the state and city level?
Yeah, there are actually many, I would say maybe too many. We're a part of, there's the C40 Cities Network, which is international. It started as 40 cities and we were one of the first 40. It's now actually 100 cities internationally that have ambitious climate goals that work together. Domestically, there's a Climate Mayors Network. As it sounds, it's a mayors network, so it's for the mayors to participate in and share. There's another one called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is meant for me and my colleagues in 175 cities in the US and Canada. And so it's very much all of these different groups bring different benefits in terms of, sharing best practices, funding opportunities, training, and things like that. So they all have their own values. I'm not sure I understand the second part of the question. How does federal commerce, transportation, interior link to the goals? I don't know. I mean, I think, we're still seeing how the Biden administration is rolling out their climate efforts. Yesterday, they just made a whole slew of new commitments and announcements. And what I see in that administration is that they're taking a whole of government approach, right, where they don't see sustainability and climate as an EPA only issue. They're seeing, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Commerce, Interior, everybody's expected to play a role and to be contributing. And so I think all of the programs that come from those different departments are going to help us access. I think funding obviously is an obvious need, but even technical assistance is really important for us to not to have to hire kind of technical experts all the time, and to tap into the expertise that these folks have. So I think we'll be able to align better with some of those programs and take advantage of them.
Christine, this is Eric Elmore. I'm the one that asked that question, just so you know. So yeah, you actually answered it. You may not have understood it, but you answered it exactly what I was looking for. But I have a follow-up, and that is, who sets the standards? If there are several different consortiums working together, there's a federal government, there are cities working together, states working together. What are the standards that that they're all following? Are they all different? Is that a good thing? Is it, not a good thing? I think you get where I'm going with this.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. It's a really good question. And starting about a year ago, I was the World Resources Institute is sort of a think tank in the environmental space. They convened a number of different cities to come and have essentially a conversation over several days around this question, because it was a year out from the presidential election, and they were wondering, if Trump doesn't win, we knew what his policies were. If someone new was going to come in and do better on climate, I think the question they had was essentially, what's the proper role for the federal, state, and local governments? Who sets what projects and priorities and goals? And as you said, is it okay if some of them are out of alignment, or do they have to all be in lockstep? Obviously the feds can bring certain assets in terms of major funding, et cetera, but local governments tend to know their constituents better, certainly understand environmental justice issues generally better than the federal government does. So they kind of laid out this whole strategy of like what each level of government is best at doing and what role they should be playing. And so, I think it is okay if states want to go beyond, it's like the federal government should be setting the floor of what minimally needs to get done, and then states can be more ambitious than that, and cities can be even more ambitious, but having some sort of floors set for what's minimally needed to get done seems to be something that we would expect to come from the feds.
Okay. What are the city's goals around battery electric vehicles? Is there a plan to install infrastructure to support residents who want to transition to electric vehicles, or for rideshare companies such as Uber and Lyft transitioning to battery vehicles?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a tough one, honestly. And again, we're part of these networks, so we talk to our colleagues in other cities, and I don't think any city has really gotten this fully figured out. So that the major issues are, one, we're a city, so we don't tend to have a lot of individual private parking lots. People park in, on the street in public spaces, and so they can't easily always have their own charging station that's for their vehicle. So then the question, then they look like the obvious thing would be to have the city install charging infrastructure on the street. But the city has never played, government has never played the role as a gas station, right? That's not the role that the city has played, is to help people, energize their private vehicle. So let's just say we wanted to step into that space. It's expensive, really expensive for us to do so, to support folks to buy $35,000 cars that most of our residents can't afford in the first place. So there's a major equity concern there. Why would we spend lots and lots of money to, support a very small portion of the population? And then there's also the speed of government doesn't move very fast. So by the time we installed, the technology is likely to keep advancing and changing and improving. So by the time we install something, the DC fast chargers are changing the game. I'm hearing there's a third charging system on the way that could basically be on par with the time of gas, essentially like 30 miles per minute of gassing up. So, I mean, the technology is moving so fast, I think we would be worried about making an investment in old technology. And so, I mean, I'm just giving you some flavor for it. So I think the things we can do, one is the city's going to be putting out our own municipal clean fleet plan. So how we can use our own vehicles to move in that direction. We're certainly helping other larger fleets in the city, the school district, the ports, the airport, colleges and universities. We just held, we run this organization called the Climate Collaborative of Philadelphia, which I should have mentioned earlier, for businesses and large institutions to work together to have our own little mini sort of sharing within the city. We just held 2 fleet electrification workshops for that group. So helping those who have larger fleets and have more ability to do charging. And I think the question around like Uber and Lyft and car sharing for me in general is a smart one as well, that there's an opportunity there to do more on requiring, sort of electrification. I think it's the private vehicle piece that's still going to be difficult for us to tackle, and we're keeping our eye on what best practices are. Sorry, it's a long-winded answer. I think the last part I'll say is PICO has been advocating for a bill at the state level that would allow them to basically invest in public charging infrastructure and then recoup those costs through ratepayer bills. So I think they want to be the gas station, basically. They want utilities playing that role, which does seem to make sense. They provide the electricity, they're going to benefit from that increase in business. So if that bill passes, I think that will probably open up, the unlock the sort of potential of EV charging in the city.
Can you give us an update on the recycling program? We recall hearing most recycled items in Philadelphia don't actually get recycled, and that much of it ends up in landfills. Is that an urban myth?
Yeah, I think the use of quotations around recycled items is actually the key point, is that a lot of people put non-recyclable items in their recycling bins. And so then they get to the recycling facility and get sorted out and sent to the landfill. Actually recyclable items that get there do get recycled in great part. We did have, as folks know, major challenges this year in the streets department with COVID, of a sort of a dual-edged problem of sanitation workers getting COVID and calling out and not being able to work. So they had a reduced workforce. And then we were all at home. Instead of creating trash at our schools and office buildings and other places, we were creating all of our trash at home. So almost doubling of residential trash and recycling. So they had an increased demand on need and like less staff to do it. And so they started just throwing recycling right in with trash, which drove me crazy as a sustainability person, but more so drove me crazy because we weren't being good at communicating about it. And that to me was the part that was really challenging, because this is the urban myth, right, that always comes out. If we're not communicative and upfront with people, then they don't trust that the system works most of the time. And so I do want to reiterate, most of the time it really does work, but please do be aware of what is actually recyclable and what is not. Plastic bags are not. Number one biggest problem, people put plastic bags in the bin, they go to the recycling facility and they jam up the gears at the recycling facility. So they have to shut the whole facility down and clean them out of all the cogs and wheels, literally after an hour or two of productive time where workers are just standing around waiting to get back to work because the bags jam up the equipment so badly. So that's number one, keep out. We used to say when single stream got started, if when in doubt, throw it in and they'll sort it out later. Now it's very much the opposite. If you're in doubt, put it in the trash. You're causing more problems and costing the city more money by putting stuff in the bin that can't actually get recycled.
Do you mean the little the plastic shopping bags from the grocery store?
Any
That people-
plastic bags, yep.
Yep.
Little shopping bags, like big garbage bags, any film, what they call a plastic film, so anything that's like packaging films, none of that is recyclable in your blue bin. Some like grocery stores or other places might have a bin where you can put your bags in there for recycling, but at the curbside, it is not, those are not recyclable.
Are you talking only city or even in the suburbs? Because
Yeah,
I
so-
know most people put all the recycling in the plastic bags to put out.
You should not be doing that. In Philadelphia, you have to put your recycling, I'm talking from a residential perspective. I know some of you are commercial property managers, so your commercial recycling rules are dependent more on who your commercial waste hauler and provider is. So if you have a commercial enterprise, this is not for you. This is just for the residential piece. You have to put your recycling in a hard-sided container. That is to reduce litter that causes when bags break open. But it is also because plastic bags, again, are not good for the system and should not be put out. Now, when, again, going back to the quotes of recyclable, technically anything could be recyclable. It's about whether there's a market and an outfit that actually would take those items to recycle them. So, I think most folks know generally that like styrofoam is not recyclable, right? We've never collected that at the curbside. There is actually a facility in Northeast Philadelphia that recycles styrofoam. So if you want to take your styrofoam there, you certainly can. And it's just a matter of finding the outlet for it. So it's hard to say what is recyclable and what's not, because it's really a definition of, is there a place that will take it and recycle it or not? And how much of a market is there? So styrofoam is very lightweight. You'd have to get a lot of it to make it worthwhile for the city to actually pay to get that recycled. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Christine, why is it that plastic bags are recycled are a bad thing, but garbage bags are not?
But all bags are bad in the recycling bin. No bags of any kind in the recycling bin.
You just never hear anybody saying we should ban garbage bags, but everybody says we should ban plastic shopping bags.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the difference of what we're saying is recyclable or not, and then there's a difference of what kinds of bags cause the most harm or sort of have the least benefit. And plastic bags have bans and fees have been very popular for cities around the country and the world, in part because they just seem so unnecessary for so many uses. Like, I'm sure everyone's had the thing of like buying a pack of gum and getting a plastic bag for it, and you're like, do I really need this? And then 5 minutes later, it's in a tree, outside. There's just, it causes so many problems. They also, you'll hear maybe this from the water department next week, but they also clog up our sewer systems and our drains. They just have such an outsized, you don't see like people's individual garbage bags causing those problems because they're generally going out, getting picked up and going to a landfill. So they're not causing generally as much societal problems as those little, store plastic bags do.
Has a developer and location been selected for the city's solar initiative? If so, what is the size of the system?
Yeah, we've selected a developer called Community Energy, and they had a location in Adams County, which is near Gettysburg-ish area. It's a 70 megawatt facility, so it's about 700 acres of land with the potential to take it up to 80. And then they actually sold the project to another company called NG, who will actually be doing the building and the construction and maintenance of the facility. The pandemic we should have started construction this month, but it's not going to happen for another year because supply chains and you name it, everything that happened with the pandemic just threw it off. So still forthcoming.
Okay, here's another one. What are the programs for refrigerant management? Project Drawdown identified this as the most critical area for GHG reductions.
Very good question. And we have no refrigerant management plans at all, but I know that I read the Paul Hawkins book, which was really interesting in how he sort of broke down, the different, the thing that blew my mind in his was that educating girls and reproductive choice for women combined were like the most impactful things. So kind of intersection of some of my interests as well. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I thought his breakdown, I think that refrigerant management is one of those things that's again, probably beyond a city capacity issue. I think that's kind of more of a state and fed program where like extended producer responsibility program, et cetera, it's not really something that the city can implement at our scale. So I would hope that that would be something we'll see from the Biden administration.
That was the last question that I saw in chat. Does anybody have any questions you want to unmute and ask? Otherwise, one question that we have been asking some of our speakers is, if you had a magic wand and could do one magical swipe for the city to improve it, what would that be?
For me, that's the question to me?
Yes. And
that's a really tough one. I think for everybody to have a family sustaining job would maybe be my single magic wand. If I think, to address poverty, which is, I think, our single biggest risk in the city. That poverty shows up in so many different ways and outcomes in terms of poor public health and education and violence. And, to me, like economic opportunity is one of the major solutions to fixing many of the city's problems. And, I didn't say this up front, but I think the way the city views, the way that my office anyway views the climate challenge is that it can be a very scary thing. It could be this multiplier of those risks. It could make poverty worse. It could make violence worse. It could make health outcomes worse. But it could also be a multiplier of opportunity. It can, help create new good jobs. It can help, improve public health. It can make, more resilient, stronger neighborhoods. So it really depends on if like we let climate change happen to us and get all the negative, or if we respond proactively to climate change and use, the adage around never letting a crisis go to waste, right? Like using a crisis to change the things that have sort of fundamentally been wrong. And, there's been an overused term around like building back better from the pandemic, but I do think it is, a really good frame to think about the way we got into so many of the problems that we faced this last year, right? Like a pandemic, a climate crisis, a racial reckoning, all of these things kind of have similar roots in terms of the way our society operated. And so if we can find common solutions to those problems and address multiple problems at the same time, I think that's the Build Back Better challenge that I hope we're all up to. We don't just go back to the same systems that weren't working for all of us in the first place.
Christine, I have a question. So we're going to kind of redo the refinery, right? We have plans for that. So what's your feeling about that? How's that going to go? Probably some cleanup involved. How's that all going to work? And when it's all done, we're probably going to have a much better thing than a refinery. But what's your honest feeling about that whole area, which has been a huge polluter of our air, correct?
Yeah, the refinery alone was responsible for 17% of our carbon footprint. So, and like 85% of the toxic air pollutants in the city. So very negative, outcome there. I've had such an interesting relationship with the refinery over my career. David, you might remember I worked at Clean Water Action before I came to Penn Future, and I did community organizing in the neighborhoods around the refinery, around air quality concerns. And we actually sued them for violations several times. And then years later, I met my husband, whose father worked there for most of his career and raised my husband and his 4 sisters on his union salary. That was a good family sustaining job. And then I'm director of sustainability, and the thing blows up, and we have to deal with the outcome of that. So it's just kind of been this place that keeps coming back haunt me. But yeah, I think in general, the fact that it's not going to be a refinery anymore is for the good. That doesn't mean that we should just say anything that happens there is fine because it's better than what it was, right? We still need to keep an eye towards maximizing the value. I think Hilco's making some pretty big commitments around employing, people from the community around. I think they've made some suggestions that we hope that we get them firmer into commitment around putting solar on their logistics buildings. I think one of the main concerns is the remediation of the site and the truck traffic, because it's a logistics hub. We imagine there'll be a lot of trucks coming in and out. And so those are the two things that I think we'll be keeping an eye on. And the remediation piece is so difficult because Sunoco is still on the hook for much of it when part of the deal when they sold it back in 2011 or whatever that was. So they are still an actor, and then Hilco is still an actor. And the crazy thing is that the refinery preceded the existence of the EPA by 100 years. So we don't even know what we don't know a little bit about what's on that site because there was nobody inspecting it or setting regulations around it for 100 years, before. So yeah, I think it's a challenge. So it's, again, I think the key is to not just say, well, it's better than a refinery, so anything goes. I think we'll have to, we should keep pushing and making sure we get the most we can out of it.
Thank you.
Looks like we have one last specific question. Is your office familiar with ground glass pozzolan, a cement replacement in concrete made from waste glass? If so, do you have any plans to start using it in city construction?
I haven't heard of that one specifically. I have heard of a different cement replacement technology as well. And the issue that we run up against often with this is that there's sort of NICS requirements that usually come from the State Department of Transportation around what we're allowed to use in city streets and cement. So it often takes state action to enable us to use different materials. But it is something that we're really interested in pursuing, partly from a perspective of what we call smart surfaces. So as we talked about the heat, the heat problem in the cities, much of that comes from, blacktop parking lots and all of our dark, streets and everything and black rooftops. And so for roofs, we know white and reflective roofs, go a long way. What's the similar version of that we can use on streets that can help make our streets cooler? We've seen some cities like LA that have been piloting, cool surfaces. And so we want to do a pilot on a city parking lot just to kind of get some data on the differential in temperature, but also on maintenance concerns. How does it respond to freezing and thawing and heat and plowing and, all the things that happen on our streets. So I think these sort of material uses are definitely to be something we're going to be looking at in the coming years.
Right.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I joined late and I'm gonna talk. It's quicker than typing, but I've been working for years on adaptation strategies for climate change. And the process you just explained for Cool Street, every new strategy, reply testing, changing regulation, often going back to the state. And I feel such a sense of urgency, but it's and everyone wants to do good, but it's so difficult and it takes so much time. And I feel we're going to run out of time. And that's an unfair question, but what would be your piece of advice, in some ways to speed the process?
Yeah, it's a real concern. It's a real issue. As I said, I don't know if you were on earlier, but I said the speed of government, is often much too slow. And so, part of that is then is the innovation from non-government that pushes things so much faster. When the private sector is really fully engaged, when residents are really demanding action, that's what speeds things up and creates that sense of urgency that, we have to do. But I do think there is also the reason in part that government often does things slow is because we have to be good stewards of the public dollars in which we're trusted. So if we just said, all right, from now on, we're using this white reflective concrete, and in 2 years it was all broken up because it couldn't handle freezing and thawing, like we'd look pretty dumb, right? So there's a reason why a certain amount of slow piloting, testing, making sure things work is necessary part of it as well, because I think too often we look back at our predecessors, when I show that heat map and we try to understand why there's such a disparity, it's from redlining. It's from a city's sort of racist history of redlining. And we look back and we say, oh, those people 50 years ago, how terrible of them. And I don't want to be in this situation ever 50 years from now, someone saying, well, Christine really jammed this whole thing up and created a problem, So I think trying to have no regrets plans that we can move forward with is I think the right thing to do. But yeah, I think the speed is going to come by everybody being all in and creating that sense of urgency. It seems to me thus far, the federal administration seems like they are coming at this with a lot of urgency, which is good. And hopefully that trickles down. We also, I should just say, I try not to be too overt with this, but we also need more money in my office and in the offices that carry this work forward. So it's budget season. If you are so inclined, feel free to convey your feelings about the sense of urgency to City Council.
Well, if we have no one else, I'll close. And Ben, before I pass it over to you, hearing